government and opposition today, urging them to bring on the debate on the Greens bill to prohibit the export of live animals for slaughter in the next sitting of Parliament. It's 14th of June, for the fortnight after the 14th of June. There's huge public feedback to all parliamentarians' offices, I think, on this issue. People want action on it, and the best way to get action is to have the Greens bill brought on and debated and passed through both houses of Parliament in that coming fortnight. The bill, when implemented, would place a prohibition on the export of live animals for slaughter, not just to Indonesia but to elsewhere in the world. That's what the Australian people want. If we're going to stop the cruelty that we've seen serially in countries overseas which don't have the standards that Australia has, then we need to be ensuring that the slaughter occurs here in Australia and the meat is exported to those markets developing to our north and elsewhere in the world.
So the government has banned exports to 12 Indonesian abattoirs. There are about 100 more in Indonesia that use the same techniques. Is this the current ban of the government's not doing enough?
No, the current ban doesn't put the prohibition on the export of live animals for slaughter anywhere in the world. That's what we need. We are, in this age, able to get beyond putting cattle, sheep, whatever, onto ships for long sea voyages with the inevitable discomfort for animals that requires, and then have them taken ashore to a whole multiplicity of countries which have different standards for slaughter, lower standards for slaughter and against animal cruelty than Australia. We should be fostering the marketing of meat overseas which is slaughtered in this country according to Australian standards.
Are you concerned about the effects it might have on northern farming towns?
Well, there's always worry about the effects, but you could argue that the live animal exports have actually closed abattoirs and lost jobs here in Australia. We need to reverse that process and get the jobs back to Australia and increase the employment coming out of the export meat market from Australia.
Adam Bandt has said that there'll be a 20% greater return by processing onshore. Is there a way to do this though that complies with halal meat requirements?
Yes, and there's very clearly people who are more expert in halal meat processing requirements than me, who are saying that halal requirements are met in Australia and can be assured to markets overseas that require halal standards for the slaughter of livestock.
The government has commissioned a report, or at least a look by the Chief Veterinary Officer of this issue, and particularly of the restraint boxes. Would you call for that report to be made public?
Yeah, the report should be made public, but we should also accept that we are going to get a variety of standards of slaughter in many countries overseas, and most of them are going to be below Australian standards. The only way we can ensure Australian standards is by having the slaughter here in Australia, and if we're going to see a reliable meat export industry which Australians can feel reassured about, the slaughter needs to be here in Australia, and the export of live animals for slaughter wherever it is elsewhere in the world needs to end.
The cattle industry is saying a broad ban will kill the beef industry in the top end. Should there be compensation?
Well, it won't kill the beef industry in the top end, and this has been a very lucrative industry with very large corporations involved. I think it may be we should ask why it was left to a community group to inform Australians about the standards of slaughter in Indonesia and lead to now what's a very great feeling amongst the Australian populace. It's rare that we get this sort of feedback from constituents right across Australia that the export of live animals should be stopped. The industry was well able to be policing the slaughter in Indonesia, but let's get the industry onto a stable footing which has the backing of the Australian people by having the slaughter and the jobs created here in Australia.
Will banning live export mean, though, as Barnaby Joyce has suggested, creating a distinction between cruelty that we say is okay for Indonesian animals but not okay for Australian cattle?
Well, yes, Barnaby is aware of that, as I am, that Indonesia is a sovereign country and Australia is a sovereign country. And what I'm saying here, and I hope Barnaby will support it, is that let's respond to this huge feeling amongst the Australian people and legislate in the interests of the Australian people. I'm sure the Indonesian authorities are quite capable of doing the same. But this is an outcry in Australia calling for action on Barnaby and me and other members of Parliament, and I'm saying, well, let's respond to that feeling from the Australian people. If Barnaby's got an alternative piece of legislation, let's feed that into the debate when we come back in a fortnight.
Australians might support live exports if they could be done humanely. Are you arguing that it's impossible to have live exports humanely?
Yeah, the problem here is that Australians have been arguing now for years to end live exports, and every few years we get a furore as we find new markets opening up and new abuses of animals exported from Australia. And there is no end to it. People are not just concerned about the slaughter, they're concerned about the conditions in which animals are loaded onto ships for long sea voyages to export ports right around the world. We don't need to do that. We need to ensure that animals going for slaughter are slaughtered here in Australia. The value added and the jobs increased there as well, and that meat markets around the world can be assured that the highest standards in the world have been employed in that product being sold onto the world markets out of Australia.